So I'm currently on the phone with Walter. He's another musician that reached out about the current wave of interview sessions. So I'm going to go ahead and give him the chance to introduce himself.
Hi, Alexander. Thank you for this opportunity. And I really want to thank you guys for doing this because it's a great service for musicians and artists. And, I think I just really like what you're doing, and I think it's wonderful. My name is Walter Wilczewski. I'm part of a songwriting duo, and we're in basically the Philadelphia area. We have studios. My partner is also a producer and an arranger, and he's fairly significant. My name is Walt Wilczewski. His name is Chris Arms. He has, together our project is called Charmed Wolf Productions, and we write music for anyone, any kind of music, mostly for commercial purposes. I started writing as an artist, and so did my friend Chris. He actually wrote a couple of hits, one for a guy named Clay Walker, who's a country western artist. He had the title track of the album, and he also wrote another one for a band called Pretty Poison. He's really talented. He's brilliant. So it's really fun to be able to write with somebody who is, what it's like when I was a little kid, all I wanted to do was face a major league pitcher so I could say I did it and to see how I measured up. But I got the same thing because I got to write with a guy who has, very documented successes and large successes. So it's really cool to be able to write with somebody like that because what they bring to the table when you start to write, it's amazing. It's fun as hell.
So let's kind of go back there. You mentioned when you first started writing when you were a kid. Let's kind of focus on that for a bit. Tell me a bit more about, your interactions and your introduction into music and how that impacted you as a child.
Sure. Well, when I was a kid, it's weird because my parents had nothing to do with music and nothing to do with sports. They hated both of those things. And those are the only two things I like. So when I was around 12 or 13, I asked my parents, I want to get into music. Can you do something? Can you help me get in? And they said, we're going to buy you a snare drum. They didn't say that. They just bought it. And I looked at the drum and said, I don't want this. I want a guitar. So I just banged on that drum for about a month, and then I got a guitar.
Strategically, I assume.
Oh, yes. Yes, nice. There was no cohesiveness there.
Okay, very nice. So once you kind of, well, first of all, what made you want the guitar over the snare drum?
Well, I thought I could do a whole lot more with a guitar than I could with a snare drum because I didn't know it at the time, but my strength has always been as a songwriter. When I played in a cover band once for about 5 months, and I hated every second of it. So I just said, I'm only going to do original music from now on. So I got in with a bunch of really good musicians. And my advice to anyone is always make sure you're the weakest member of that band. That was always my motto. Never join a band that I'm not the weakest member of, because it drives you like nothing else, and you'll become great. Not that I did. I'm sorry, I got a little lost there.
That's okay. I was just kind of asking what the motivation for learning the guitar is, but let's kind of move it to the next step. Once you did get the guitar, tell me about, the learning process for it. Did you take private lessons? Did you kind of just explore it on your own? Give me some of that background.
For years, I took lessons, and I tried on my own for maybe 3 or 4 years. But once I started playing in bands, playing with other musicians, the learning curve, I learned so much so fast. Just lessons are nice. Don't get me right, because I've spent probably 10 years with 2 different classical guitarist teachers, and I've learned a ton about theory and music, and I can read music, and it's great. But there's no substitute for playing and writing your own music, especially playing with other people.
Okay, so that was kind of once you got to the point of the instrument where you felt comfortable enough to write, that was your primary focus. You wanted to create your own music.
That's right.
Okay, so let's follow that next progression. You kind of talked about meeting other musicians and playing with them, and then obviously also creating your own music. What kind of led you to that realization? Because I imagine at some point you realized that working with musicians of a higher caliber than you was going to drive you. I would assume that was not always your position.
Well, it's always the position I want to be in.
Well, but what I mean by that is when you're a kid and learning the instrument, you didn't know that aspect of it.
Oh yeah, sure. Once you start working with people, that's when you start to learn that.
Right. So when did that occur for you? What was the situation you were in when that became evident to you?
Well, let me tell you a story. My favorite composer in the world is Harry Warren. Harry Warren is a guy from the 1940s. Nobody knows him, but back then they did. He was the most prolific songwriter of his period of time. And he wrote like 42nd Street. He wrote Jeepers Creepers. He wrote Shuffle Off to Buffalo. Etta James with At Last was his. But he wrote from movies. And so his famous quote was, "I have the best life in the world. I can walk right down Broadway and nobody will notice me, and I'm fabulously wealthy." So, basically, I knew I wanted to be a writer, a composer. And so when I started interacting with other musicians, immediately it was, hey, I'm going to write some stuff. I became the writer in every band I was in. Usually there was just me or another guy. But that kind of discipline, when you have a whole band waiting for you, say like it's a Friday night practice and your last practice was last week and they're coming in, they want to know, okay, what did you write? What does it sound like? And how can we make it better? And you have to be prepared. You can't go in there and sort of wing it. You've got to have the work done.
And so how many kind of iterations of a band do you think you went through as the primary writer?
I think we played in maybe 3 or 4 of those bands. And I lived in an area that was really cool. Where I lived, they really supported original music. There was a bar called Joe's Bar and Grill. And it was a biker bar on some nights. Some nights it was, just a sleazy dive. But it always had original bands. And the bands they got in there, some of them became real famous, like George Thorogood, Stretch. I remember Stretch. There was bikers got in a fight, and the keyboard from Stretch was screaming, "My hands, my hands!" And we had to drag him upstairs so that he could get away from the biker fight. But so I went through that. But I quickly, after several of those bands, it became I didn't want to tour. I didn't want to be in a bar every night anymore. I just said, this kind of sucks. I mean, I liked playing with the other musicians, but I really didn't enjoy playing live music at all. And I still don't. I play here and there, but I like to write. And my greatest satisfaction comes from writing music and then recording it. And usually what I do is, Chris and I will write something together. We'll put our parts down. Then we'll hire a couple of musicians, and then, then we'll mix and master it.
Okay, so let's talk about how that got you where you are now. You mentioned that with Chris, you set up your own production company. Tell me about that.
Well, Charmed Wolf Productions is basically we set this project up so that we could write for commercial music. One of the things I realized was, I started doing some market research. My background is a musician, songwriter, and an entrepreneur. I started a technology business and ran it for 20 years while I was working for Annie Bird Music. Annie Bird Music writes for children's music. Children's music they work with authors and stuff. It's great, but it provided me an avenue to keep playing music all the time and writing for them. And then when I met Chris at Annie Bird Music. He was writing for her as well. And then we got to know each other. We started playing sometimes together, and we started writing on projects for Annie Bird Music. And then we decided, hey, maybe we should write together. And so we did. But we thought, we don't want to work with sync agents. We don't want to work with music libraries. It's too iffy. And the contracts are just one-sided. It's ugly. Why don't we just go out and do it ourselves? Which is what we did, and it's been successful. So, it's working with Chris on this project with Charmed Wolf. It's one of the things I realized early on was, Frito-Lay. Frito-Lay had a commercial for Tostitos, potato chips, where they just used the crunch of the chip and maybe, some music, but that was it. Then somebody at their marketing department had a great idea. Let's target the music to the product. And the whole time that we're playing music, it's going to enhance whatever we want on the screen. And so what they did is they increased the sales by 38% within 3 months after starting their Sonic branding. And so there's money to be made, and there's probably way more money to be made than there is with just libraries or sync agents who, never respond, have crappy contracts. That's just not worth it for me.
Sure. So how long have you guys been writing under that production company?
This is relatively new. We wrote for Annie Bird Music for years and years. And just in the last 2 to 3 years, I'd say 2.5 years, we started Charmed Wolf Productions.
Okay. And with the purpose being like putting out commercial songs or commercial music, are we talking about like commercial jingles, or like, because you just mentioned the Doritos thing, or are we talking about like, selling a song to like a country superstar, or just selling a song in general? I guess I shouldn't have pointed that out.
Yeah, no, it's like I said, Chris has had that success. He's written for country superstars. I haven't, but that's not where we wanted to go this time. And then the reason is, that's a really hard market, and if you really want to get into that world, the people who are buying music now are in Nashville. So you got to be in Nashville, and you can't go there once a week or once a month. You have to live there. You have to build relationships. And I don't have the time for that. But with my approach, going commercial, it's not as fulfilling because it's commercial music. But on the other hand, when I wrote for myself or I wrote for an artist, I had terrible anxiety because it had to be, I was writing it. My name was on it. It was for me. It was everything about me, and it had to be great, whether it was or not, right? But when I'm writing for commercial, I go at it like it's a job, and I want to write the best thing I can based on what the customer wants. I want to give that customer exactly what he wants. I want to drive his sales, so the next time he thinks about somebody, he's thinking about us.
Okay, so we are talking about like the music that's in commercials.
That's correct. TV, film, movies.
So do you find that with that kind of being a way that you're generating money, and then also putting, the creative energy into that, it has a impact on how you approach your like personal music and the way that you create your own stuff?
Well, only in that, I want to work all the time. For me, that's the thing that drives me. I want to work all the time. And when I'm writing for these commercial music, I get work all the time, or at least I'm working all the time. And when I'm working all the time, I'm getting better. And so, look, the first time I realized how important this is, I played 5 nights, when I was a kid. Like, my writing partner was a radio studio rat. He was in all the studios in New York and Philadelphia from the time he was like 15 years old. He was a prodigy, but I wasn't. So,
Well, that's kind of what I'm getting at with being engaged, creating music commercially. You might push yourself since you said that you're operating at that higher level. You might find a process or discover something while you're working on the music in your DAW or whatever that has a direct translation to the way that you're creating as well. So it's kind of that 10,000 hours to master a skill kind of thing where you're doing it so much commercially. Once you go to the creative process to focus on what you personally want to express, you have the technical ability from operating at that higher level commercially.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you learn so many cool little things, and especially things that you get really frustrated with when you say, I don't have time for this, I don't know how this works, I don't have time to fix this, I just want to get it done. And then you spend the time and you fix it, and you knew you had to anyway. You just wanted to complain, but you learn something through the process. And every time you do that, you learn more and more. And yeah, that's you're right. That is like the cool for me. Learning is the most fun thing I can do in the world.
Sure. Yeah, I could definitely see how that it would be majorly beneficial to tapping into the creative process as well. Perfect. So. Where does that kind of leave you now? What are you guys currently working on to put out?
Well, we're still doing some cool stuff with Annie Bird Music. I don't know. You're probably pretty young. You probably don't know. When I was a kid, there was a magazine in the schools called Highlights magazine, and that was every kid knew that at the time. Anyway, they've started working with Annie Bird Music, and so now we're writing music for Highlights.
That's I mean, I assume Highlights is still in schools. It's been a while for myself as well, but yeah, I assume they're still there.
So we're doing that. We're doing work with some TV commercials, something that should be hopefully is going to be on ABC Sports at some point.
Okay. So tell me about some of your favorite memories that have kept you motivated to continue to do this.
Well, I don't know if I'll come up with a good story, but the things that I really remember are nights when we had we're at practices and the practices were just going great, and yet at the end of the practice you have this great feeling like, wow, we just put some great stuff together. I love a reaction from the audiences. I just never liked being on stage. So that memory is a good one too, because it forced me to say, do you really want to do this, or do you want to do something else? Which is what I did.
Sure. And that's perfectly reasonable. I get it. Yeah. Cool. So where can people find, you and then your production company and then anything else that you want to promote?
Well, you can find our website at charmedwolf.com, Charmed Wolf, all one word. And I'm on SoundCloud. My name is Walter Wilczewski. And Chris Arms is also on SoundCloud if you want to find him directly. And so is Annie Bird Music.
All right. And then I always like to give the person I'm interviewing the opportunity to put out their last word. So what's a message that you have that you want other people to hear?
Well, I guess I'd go back to my statement that always make sure you're the weakest member of the band. And I know how that sounds. And especially because when you're the weakest member in the band, people look at you like, hey, are you going to get that? And, so the next time you show up, you have to have it. So that's my advice, I guess.